Jalen Core lived alone on the edge of the galaxy. The planet he had chosen was a barren rock, with high winds that cut like knives and jagged cliffs that threatened to collapse at any moment. For years, he had called this place home. His only companions were the empty skies and the whispers of sandstorms that rolled across the plains. Once a decorated soldier, he now lived in silence, far away from the worlds that had once praised him. He remembered the day they exiled him. The orders he refused had seemed wrong to him, unjust and dangerous. He had questioned them openly, defied the chain of command, and paid the price. Honor meant more to him than power, more than recognition. Yet the cost was high. Friends had turned their backs. His career was destroyed, and the life he had known was gone. In his small, fortified cabin built from scavenged metals and stones, he spent his days in routine. He repaired old equipment, scavenged the nearby cliffs for useful materials, and hunted the strange, hardy creatures that roamed the rocky plains. His nights were filled with the glow of distant stars and the silence of a world that seemed to have forgotten him. Yet, something was changing. Strange signals began to flicker on his old communication array. At first, Jalen ignored them, assuming it was nothing more than interference or a malfunction. But night after night, the signals repeated, growing stronger, clearer. They carried a tone of distress, something alive and desperate. Jalen frowned, rubbing the scar across his jaw. He had sworn off interference in others' lives. He had chosen silence. And yet, the signals pressed at the edges of his conscience, pulling at memories he had tried to bury. He could not ignore them forever. One night, under a sky lit by the twin moons, a loud crash shattered the quiet. Jalen ran outside, boots kicking up clouds of dust, to find a smoking wreckage on the rocky plateau near his cabin. The twisted metal of an alien ship glowed faintly as fire licked its edges. From the wreckage emerged figures unlike anything Jalen had seen before. They were tall and lithe, with skin in shades of blue, green, and silver. Their eyes were large, intelligent, and filled with sorrow. There were 5 of them, all women, all clearly grieving. Their ships, once separate, had come together in a desperate attempt to escape a deadly enemy. "Please, help us," one of them whispered, her voice strange but understandable through a translator embedded in the wreckage. Jalen felt a tug in his chest he had not felt in years. For a moment he hesitated, hand on the rifle slung across his back. He was a soldier, trained to fight, trained to protect. But this was different. These were not enemies, they were refugees. And he was the only one nearby with the skills to help them survive. I can't," he said at first, shaking his head. "I live alone. I take no sides. You're on your own." But the aliens did not give up. They showed him their wounds, physical injuries from the crash, yes, but also deeper scars of loss. Each had lost her homeworld to a robotic armada that destroyed everything in its path. Each had lost her family, her friends, her future. And now, with nowhere else to turn, they had chosen him. Jalen stared at them. His past life had taught him to turn away from trouble to avoid unnecessary risks. But something in the way these widows looked at him, the trust, the hope, stirred something he thought he had lost. The silent part of him, buried under years of exile and regret, began to listen. "Why me?" he asked quietly, more to himself than to them. "You are strong," one said, her voice firm but gentle. "You survive where others would not. You think, you adapt, you fight. You are human, and humans survive. That is why we choose you." Jalen swallowed. He had not thought of himself as strong. He had thought of himself as broken. And yet, hearing their words, he felt a flicker of something. Perhaps purpose, perhaps the spark of hope. Over the next days, Jalen worked with the widows to stabilize their ship. They were from different worlds, different cultures, different skill sets, and yet they learned quickly. One could manipulate energy fields, another had extraordinary strength, another was skilled in medicine, while the others had knowledge of alien technology and survival tactics. Together they were impressive, but untrained in combat. That was where Jalen came in. He taught them how to defend themselves, how to think tactically, and how to use what they had at hand as weapons. He showed them how to move quietly through the rocky terrain, how to read the patterns of the wind and shadows to hide their presence. At first, they struggled. At first, he doubted whether they could survive, but day by day they improved. Even as he trained them, he could not escape the feeling that they were being watched. At night, he would peer into the darkness, scanning the jagged horizon. He had not been wrong. The robotic armada that had destroyed their homes was vast, relentless, and far from finished. He knew it was only a matter of time before they found these 5 widows. One night, as the wind howled like a living thing across the cliffs, Jalen sat near the fire outside his cabin. The widows gathered around. They spoke little, only sharing quiet stories of their lost homes, of lives ended before they could flourish. Jalen listened, offering comfort when he could, but mostly silent, letting the crackling of the fire fill the space between them. It was a strange comfort to be needed. Jalen realized he had not felt this in years, this sense that he could protect, that he could matter. Perhaps, he thought, exile had not taken everything from him. Perhaps he still had something to give. The signals from their pursuers grew stronger each day. Small drones, scout ships, and automated trackers appeared, always watching, always calculating. Jalen knew it was only a matter of time before confrontation became inevitable. And yet, in that quiet moment, he allowed himself to hope. Hope for the widows. Hope for himself. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. He made a decision. He would not abandon them. He would fight, not because he wanted glory, not because he sought revenge, but because these 5 women had chosen him, and he would honor that choice with everything he had. The wind howled louder, carrying the scent of storm and fire, as Jalen stood and looked out toward the horizon. Beyond the jagged rocks, beyond the empty plains, the universe awaited. Danger was coming. But for the first time in a long time, Jalen Core felt alive. Somewhere in the darkness, the robotic armada moved, unaware that it had awakened a force it could not easily destroy. A human, exiled and scarred, who would rise again, not alone, but with 5 unlikely allies at his side. And so, the silent exile began to speak. Not in words, but in action. The first night passed without attack, but Jalen knew it would not be the last. He looked at the widows, their faces pale but determined, and silently promised them that as long as he drew breath, he would not let them fall. In the quiet of that barren planet, surrounded by wind and jagged stone, a new story began. A story of survival, trust, and the enduring strength of humanity. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but Jalen had found purpose again. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he would not face it alone. The first days after the crash were quiet, but quiet did not last long. Jalen Core had expected the widows to be fragile, to need constant guidance, but he was wrong. Each of the 5 had skills and knowledge that surpassed his expectations. One could manipulate energy fields, creating shields and small bursts of power. Another had incredible strength, able to lift heavy debris and defend herself in ways Jalen could not. The others had medical expertise, mechanical knowledge, and a keen sense of strategy. Together, they formed a group that could survive, but only if Jalen's human instincts guided them. At first, he remained distant. He kept his rifle ready, his senses sharp. He had been exiled for a reason, and he still believed in solitude. But the widows were persistent, and their quiet courage began to chip away at his walls. They did not beg or plead. They shared their stories, their failures, and their hopes. And slowly, Jalen began to respond. "Today, we will train," Jalen said one morning, the cold wind biting at their faces. "We need to be ready. They will come." The widows nodded, their faces a mixture of determination and fear. Jalen started with the basics, moving quietly, observing their surroundings, and using the rocky terrain to their advantage. He taught them to hide in shadows, to read the wind and anticipate movement, and to make traps from the natural environment. It was difficult at first. One of the widows tripped on a loose rock, another miscalculated the timing of a trap, and frustration began to grow. Jalen did not scold them harshly. He guided, explained, and demonstrated. Slowly, they improved. One day, while exploring a nearby cliff, the widows discovered a small cave system. It was dark, narrow, and winding, but it offered shelter from the constant storms and from prying eyes. Jalen showed them how to fortify the cave, using salvaged materials from the wreckage and the rocks around them. They built walls, traps, and observation points. "This will be our base," Jalen said, his voice firm. "From here, we observe, we defend, and we plan. No one enters without permission." The widows worked tirelessly, moving as a team. Each had a role, and Jalen supervised quietly. They began to trust each other, and their trust extended to him. For the first time in years, Jalen felt useful, not as a soldier obeying orders, but as a protector, guiding those who depended on him. But the peace did not last. Small scout drones appeared first, tiny spider-like machines that moved with speed and precision. They monitored the group, gathering information. Jalen noticed their presence immediately, his instincts sharp. "They are watching," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Not yet in force, but they are coming." The widows listened carefully, understanding the gravity of the situation. One of them, the strategist, suggested creating false trails and decoys to confuse the drones. Jalen agreed. They spent the next hours setting traps and camouflage, learning how to use the terrain to their advantage. When the drones finally attacked, the group was ready. Jalen moved with precision, directing the widows with calm authority. The drones, fast and precise, were no match for the combination of human tactics and alien abilities. They were destroyed or forced to retreat. "That is your first victory," Jalen said afterward. "Remember it. You are stronger than you believe." The widows smiled, small and genuine, but Jalen could see the worry in their eyes. This was only the beginning. Their true enemy, the robotic armada that had destroyed their homes, was still out there, vast and relentless. As the days passed, Jalen began to see patterns in their abilities. One widow, strong and fearless, could create physical diversions to distract enemies. Another, skilled in energy manipulation, could shield them from attacks or disable mechanical devices temporarily. The medical expert learned quickly from Jalen, combining human first aid knowledge with her alien methods to treat injuries effectively. The strategist coordinated movements, while the fifth widow specialized in repairing and modifying the ship's remaining technology. Together, they became a team. A strange, unlikely, but effective unit. Jalen's human intuition guided them, but they contributed in ways he had never expected. One evening, while watching the twin moons rise, Jalen spoke quietly to the widows. "You've come a long way. You have learned to fight, to survive, to think ahead. But this is only the beginning. Their armada is coming. And when it does, we will need more than strength. We will need courage, creativity, and trust." The widows nodded. They understood. And Jalen could see it in their eyes. They were ready to fight, not just for survival, but for hope. Days turned into weeks, and Jalen and the widows continued their training and preparations. They scavenged parts from the wrecked ship, building weapons and defensive devices. They practiced combat maneuvers on the rocky cliffs, learning how to use both the terrain and their unique abilities to their advantage. One morning, while exploring a nearby canyon, they found evidence of enemy patrols, scorched earth, burned rocks, and the remains of a small drone. Jalen studied the tracks carefully, deducing the size, speed, and approach of the Armada's scouts. "They are near," he said, "and they are testing us. Soon, they will strike in force. We must be ready." The widows listened closely, absorbing every detail. Jalen began to teach them more advanced tactics, ambush strategies, retreat plans, and ways to exploit enemy weaknesses. He emphasized creativity, unpredictability, and adaptability, the human way of thinking that had allowed him to survive countless battles. As the days passed, the widows grew more confident. They no longer looked to Jalen solely for guidance. They began to contribute their own ideas. One suggested using energy bursts to create distractions. Another proposed using camouflage in ways Jalen had not considered. He encouraged their input, realizing that their combined abilities, when guided by human strategy, made them nearly unstoppable. But progress was interrupted by a sudden attack. A larger drone unit arrived, faster and more advanced than any they had faced before. It descended from the sky, its sensors scanning for life. Jalen reacted immediately, giving orders while moving with precision. The Widows followed, executing their training flawlessly. The battle was intense. The drones attacked relentlessly, but Jalen and the Widows used every trick they had learned. The strategist coordinated movements. The strong Widow created barriers. The energy manipulator disabled the drone's circuits temporarily, and the medical expert tended to minor injuries on the spot. The fifth Widow repaired damaged equipment quickly, ensuring they remained operational. By the end of the confrontation, the drones were destroyed, leaving scorch marks and smoke across the rocky landscape. Jalen surveyed the battlefield, proud but aware of the danger that still loomed. "This was a warning," he said. "The Armada is close. They know we exist, and they will not stop until we are gone." That night, as they sat around a fire, Jalen allowed himself a moment of reflection. The Widows slept nearby, exhausted but alive. He looked at the stars above and realized that despite exile, despite loss, he had found purpose again. He was not alone. He had allies, friends, and a reason to fight. For the first time in years, Jalen Core felt hope, not just for himself, but for the Widows, for the lives they had lost, and for the possibility of victory against impossible odds. He knew the road ahead would be difficult. The robotic armada was vast, relentless, and intelligent. But Jalen also knew that humans, when faced with challenges, when driven by honor and compassion, could achieve the impossible. And with these 5 Widows at his side, he would face whatever came with courage, strategy, and the unyielding strength of the human spirit. The night passed quietly, but Jalen remained vigilant. He had learned long ago that danger never truly slept. And as the twin moons set and the first light of dawn illuminated the barren landscape, he prepared himself for the battles ahead. The Widows awoke, ready to continue their training. Jalen watched them, a mixture of pride and determination in his eyes. They were no longer helpless. They were survivors, warriors, and his responsibility, and he would not fail them. In that quiet, rocky corner of the galaxy, the silent exile had transformed. He was no longer alone. He was a protector, a leader, and a symbol of hope. And as the distant hum of approaching ships reached his ears, Jalen knew that the next battle was coming, and he would be ready. Together, the human and the 5 alien Widows would face the storm. And together, they would fight. Not for glory, but for survival, for honor, and for the unyielding power of hope. Weeks passed since the Widow's crash, and Jalen Core's rocky sanctuary had become a small fortress. The caves had been fortified, traps and observation posts set up, and the team had learned to move silently and efficiently. Jalen had taught them not only survival but also tactics and strategy, the human way of thinking that allowed people to outthink stronger enemies. The Widows had grown stronger, faster, and more confident. Their skills, combined with Jalen's guidance, made them an unexpected force against the robotic scouts. They were no longer victims, they were fighters. But Jalen knew this was only the beginning. The robotic armada that had destroyed their homeworlds was vast, and scouts were no longer the only threat. One morning, while scanning the horizon from a cliff, Jalen noticed movement far in the distance, sleek, metallic shapes glinting in the sunlight. "They're coming," he said, his voice low but firm. "This time, it's not just scouts. It's a strike unit. We must prepare." The Widows nodded, immediately falling into the roles they had learned. The strong Widow reinforced the cave entrances, while the energy manipulator tested defensive shields. The strategist reviewed the traps, and the technician worked on salvaging parts to repair weapons and armor. The medical expert prepared supplies and emergency stations in case of injuries. Jalen's eyes scanned the horizon. The Armada's strike unit was faster and smarter than any scout. It moved with purpose, coordinating its attack like a single mind. He knew that conventional tactics would not be enough. They would need human creativity, alien abilities, and precise teamwork. As the enemy drew closer, Jalen gathered the Widows. We fight together, not separately. We use the terrain, our skills, and our wits. Predictability is our enemy. Unpredictability is our weapon. They listened closely, absorbing his words. For the first time, Jalen noticed something he had not seen before. The widows were not just following his orders. They were thinking for themselves. They suggested ideas, adapted strategies, and even challenged some of his assumptions. He allowed it, knowing that collaboration was now their greatest strength. When the strike unit arrived, the battle began. Metallic legs and weapons flashed in the sunlight as drones descended upon their location. Jalen moved quickly, directing the widows to their positions. The strong widow blocked a corridor, forcing the drones to take a longer path. The energy manipulator created a shield, deflecting laser blasts and giving the team time to react. The strategist coordinated their movements, calling out positions, traps, and ambush points. Jalen used the rocky terrain to create blind spots and choke points, forcing the enemy into disadvantageous positions. The technician disabled a drone's energy source, while the medical expert kept minor injuries under control. It was chaos, but controlled chaos. Jalen's mind raced, thinking 3 steps ahead, predicting the Armada's moves, and adjusting their strategy in real time. Each victory, no matter how small, built confidence in the widows. They began to move as one, combining their abilities in ways that surprised even Jalen. Yet the Armada was relentless. One drone managed to breach a defensive point, attacking the energy manipulator. Jalen acted without hesitation, rushing to her side and disabling the drone with a well-aimed strike. He felt the rush of adrenaline he had not experienced in years, a reminder that despite his exile, he still had the instincts of a soldier. After hours of fighting, the strike unit was destroyed, leaving scorch marks and twisted metal across the rocky landscape. The team had survived, but Jalen knew it was only a warning. The Armada's main force was far larger, more organized, and far more dangerous. That night, they regrouped around the fire, tending to minor injuries and repairing equipment. The air was heavy with exhaustion, but also with a sense of accomplishment. For the first time since their crash, the widows smiled without fear. "You did well," Jalen said quietly, looking at each of them. "But the real challenge is coming. They will not stop. They will send everything they have to finish what they started." The widows nodded, determination in their eyes. They were ready to face the Armada, and Jalen felt a surge of pride. He had chosen exile to protect himself from the world, but now he realized that strength was not meant to be hidden. It was meant to protect, to fight, to endure. Over the following days, Jalen worked with the widows to prepare for the inevitable. They mapped the terrain, improved traps, and practiced advanced maneuvers. They learned to move silently through the rocky cliffs, to use shadows and terrain for cover, and to coordinate attacks with precision. One morning, while scouting a narrow canyon, they discovered evidence of enemy patrols: burned rock, crushed plants, and small drones moving in patterns. Jalen studied the tracks carefully. "They are learning," he said. "They are adapting to our methods. We must adapt faster." The widows suggested new strategies, using energy bursts to create false trails, hiding in unlikely places, and using their abilities in combination to confuse the enemy. Jalen encouraged their input, realizing that their creativity, combined with human strategy, gave them a significant advantage. As they prepared, a sudden alert came from the energy manipulator. A large force of drones was approaching from the eastern cliffs, faster and more coordinated than before. Jalen quickly assessed the situation. They were outnumbered, but not outsmarted. "Positions," he shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "We fight smart. We fight together." The battle began with precision. Drones moved in formation, weapons flashing, but the team anticipated every move. The strong widow blocked a path, forcing the drones into traps. The energy manipulator created shields and temporary disruptions in the drone's circuits. The strategist coordinated movement and attacks, while the technician disabled key devices. Jalen fought alongside them, using his skills to outmaneuver the drones and protect the widows. Each action, each decision, demonstrated the strength and unpredictability of humans. The drones, though relentless, struggled against the combination of tactics, creativity, and determination. The fight was long and exhausting. Dust, smoke, and sparks filled the air. But by the end, the drones were destroyed, leaving the canyon littered with wreckage. The team had survived, but Jalen knew this was only a fraction of what was coming. That night, as they rested, Jalen reflected on the journey so far. The widows had grown from frightened refugees to skilled fighters. They had learned human tactics, adapted to challenges, and discovered their own strengths. And Jalen had learned something as well, that humans were strongest not when alone, but when guiding and inspiring others. "You have all done well," he said softly, looking at each widow. "But the Armada is coming, and when they arrive, we will face them all at once. This will be the real test." The widows nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Fear was still present, but it was tempered by courage, skill, and trust. They had survived impossible odds, and now they would face the greatest challenge of all. In the days that followed, they trained harder, built better defenses, and tested new strategies. Jalen encouraged creativity, letting the widows propose tactics and adjust plans based on their experiences. Each night, they shared stories of lost worlds and lives, strengthening their bond and resolve. One evening, while observing the horizon, Jalen noticed something new: a massive shadow moving in space, larger than any ship he had seen. He realized the Armada's main force had arrived, and the time for preparation was over. "We fight together," he said, his voice steady and calm. "No one fights alone. Remember everything you've learned. Trust each other and trust yourselves." The widows nodded, determination in their eyes. Jalen could see the spark of hope and courage that had once been buried within him, now reflected in them. Together, they were ready. The first strike would come soon, and the battle for survival and for hope was about to begin. Jalen Core, the exiled soldier, would lead 5 alien widows into the storm, relying on human ingenuity, alien abilities, and unyielding courage. This was no longer just survival. It was a fight for honor, for hope, and for the enduring strength of the human spirit. And Jalen knew that no matter the odds, they would face the Armada together, as one. The silent exile was gone. In its place stood a protector, a leader, and a symbol of resilience. And as the shadows of the Armada stretched across the horizon, Jalen and the widows prepared to show the galaxy what humans, and their allies, were capable of. The sky above Jalen Core's sanctuary was dark, with the shadow of the robotic Armada. Ships larger than mountains glinted ominously in the sunlight, their sensors scanning the rocky planet for any sign of life. For weeks, Jalen and the 5 widows had prepared for this moment, but nothing could completely erase the weight of knowing how massive their enemy was. "This is it," Jalen said, his voice calm but firm. "They have come for us. Remember everything we have trained for. Stay together, stay sharp, and trust yourselves, and each other." The widows nodded. They were tired, bruised, and scarred from weeks of battle and training, yet their eyes shone with courage. They had grown from frightened refugees into warriors, each bringing her unique skills to the fight. And Jalen, once an exiled soldier living in silence, now stood as their leader, protector, and symbol of hope. The first wave of drones descended from the Armada like a storm. Their metallic bodies gleamed under the light, and their movement was precise, almost too perfect to be human-made. Jalen raised his hand, signaling the widows to take their positions. The strong widow moved first, blocking the main pathway to their base. The energy manipulator created shields that flickered with blue light, deflecting the initial barrage of energy blasts. The strategist called out positions, directing their movements with calm authority. The technician prepared traps and improvised weapons, while the medical expert readied emergency supplies. Jalen watched the battlefield carefully. Unlike the drones they had faced before, these were coordinated, smart, and relentless. He needed more than brute force. He needed cunning, unpredictability, and teamwork, the strengths of humans and their allies combined. "Remember the terrain," he shouted. "Force them where we want them. Make them think they are winning." The widows moved with precision. The strong Widow used boulders and debris to create choke points, funneling the drones into traps. The energy manipulator sent pulses of energy that temporarily disabled multiple drones at once. The strategist called out patterns and weaknesses, while the technician improvised explosives from the wreckage. Jalen moved among them, striking drones with exact timing and protecting the Widows from harm. For hours, the battle raged. The drones attacked relentlessly, but Jalen's strategies turned their predictability against them. He used the cliffs, the caves, and the rocky terrain to their advantage, striking quickly and disappearing before the drones could respond. Each victory, small or large, boosted the Widow's confidence. But the Armada was patient. After the first wave, a larger force appeared. Tanks, walkers, and flying drones, all moving as one massive, coordinated army. The air shook with their approach, and the ground trembled under their weight. Jalen knew they could not win by strength alone. They would have to outthink their enemy. "We need a plan," he said to the Widows, pointing at the map they had drawn in the sand. "We hit them where they are weakest. We confuse them, divide them, and strike when they least expect it. We will use everything we have, and more." The Widows listened intently. They had trained for this, but now the real test had come. Jalen's mind raced, calculating, predicting, and adjusting. He remembered every battle he had fought in the past, every strategy that had worked, and combined it with the Widow's unique abilities. As the enemy closed in, Jalen called out orders. "Energy Manipulator, create a diversion near the eastern cliffs. Strong Widow, block the southern pass. Technician, set traps along the canyon. Strategist, coordinate movements. Medical expert, stay ready for injuries. I will lead the main strike." The plan unfolded perfectly. The energy manipulator's diversion drew a portion of the Armada into a narrow canyon, where the strong Widow's barricades funneled them into explosive traps. Jalen led the main strike, moving swiftly among the drones, dismantling them with precision strikes and human ingenuity. The Widows followed his lead, striking with timing and coordination that even the robotic forces could not predict. Hours passed, and the battle intensified. Sparks flew, rocks exploded, and the air was filled with the hum of energy and the screams of machines. The Widows fought fearlessly, inspired by Jalen's leadership and the trust they had built together. During a lull in the fighting, Jalen noticed one of the Widows trapped under a fallen boulder after an explosion. Without hesitation, he ran to her, lifting the rock with strength and precision, saving her from certain death. The small act reminded him, and the Widows, why they were fighting. It was not for glory, but for survival, for hope, and for each other. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the battlefield, Jalen realized that the Armada's main force was still advancing. He needed a final, decisive strategy to turn the tide. He gathered the Widows in a temporary safe zone and whispered his plan. "We will use the energy from their own ships against them," he explained. "We create a trap near the canyon's edge. They will think we are cornered, but we will turn the canyon into a gauntlet. They will enter, and we will strike from every direction." The Widows nodded, understanding the risks. They had no choice but to trust him. Jalen had proven himself countless times, and now their lives depended on that trust. The trap was set. As the Armada's main force entered the canyon, the Widows executed Jalen's plan flawlessly. Explosives went off at calculated points. Energy pulses disabled critical systems, and Jalen led a coordinated strike from the cliffs and behind cover. The robotic forces were disoriented, trapped, and vulnerable. Jalen's human ingenuity shone through every move. He anticipated their patterns, predicted their reactions, and used the environment to turn the battle in their favor. The Widows fought with courage and skill, their combined abilities amplifying the impact of every attack. After a long and grueling battle, the Armada's forces were destroyed. Sparks and smoke filled the canyon, but the team stood victorious. The Widows cheered quietly, exhausted but alive, while Jalen surveyed the battlefield. He felt a mixture of relief, pride, and a deep sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile. The exiled soldier had not only survived but had led a team of 5 alien Widows to victory against impossible odds. He had reclaimed his honor, not through obedience to orders, but through courage, ingenuity, and the unyielding strength of humanity. That night, as they camped near the canyon, the widows shared quiet words of gratitude. "You saved us," one said softly. "We would not be alive without you." Jalen shook his head. "No, we saved each other. You fought, adapted, and survived. You were brave. I only guided you." The widows smiled, understanding that Jalen's humility was part of what made him a true leader. Together they had proven that courage, intelligence, and trust could overcome even the most powerful enemy. In the following days, they repaired the canyon and their base, preparing for any remaining threats. The robotic armada had been defeated, for now, but Jalen knew the universe was vast, and danger could return at any time. Yet, he no longer feared it alone. The widows had become more than allies. They were family. Each had grown, learned, and contributed in ways that reminded Jalen of humanity's true strength: the ability to adapt, to survive, and to inspire hope in the darkest moments. As they prepared to leave the canyon and continue their journey through the galaxy, Jalen looked back at the barren planet where his exile had begun. It had been a place of silence, isolation, and despair. But now it was a place of courage, triumph, and transformation. "I never expected to find purpose here," he said aloud. "And yet, I have. You have all shown me that hope can survive anywhere, even in the hardest places." The widows nodded, understanding that their journey was far from over. Together, they would continue to face challenges, explore the galaxy, and protect those who could not protect themselves. Jalen Core, the exiled soldier who had lived in silence, was no longer alone. He was a leader, a protector, and a symbol of resilience. Humanity had once again proven its strength, not through domination, but through courage, intelligence, and the willingness to fight for others. As the team boarded their repaired ship, ready to explore new worlds and confront new challenges, Jalen looked at the stars above. They stretched endlessly, full of danger, mystery, and opportunity. But for the first time in years, he felt ready. The silent exile had ended. The human soldier had risen, not for glory but for hope. And in that hope, he found redemption, purpose, and the unshakable truth that humans, when united with courage and intelligence, could overcome anything the universe threw at them. The ship lifted off, the engines humming with life, and the team flew into the stars. Behind them, the canyon stood as a testament to their triumph. Ahead, the galaxy awaited, full of possibilities. Jalen smiled, looking at the widows around him. Together, they would face the unknown. Together, they would survive. Together, they would inspire hope wherever they went. And somewhere deep in the vastness of space, the universe itself seemed to take notice, as if acknowledging that humanity, and those who fought alongside them, were forces not to be underestimated. The story of the exiled soldier and the 5 alien widows had reached a new chapter, one of courage, unity, and the enduring power of hope. And for Jalen Core, the future, though uncertain, was finally something to embrace.